I have removed all my assets from the Binance Smart Chain. I already don't use the Binance centralized exchange. I don't use any centralized exchange for that matter. I only use Web3, but I now also have removed all of the money from the BSC. I have bridged it to other blockchains. Now, do I expect that the Binance Smart Chain is going to collapse tomorrow? Probably not. But there's a fundamental concept here that I think most people get wrong. Most people think in order to win big, you have to risk big, right? High risk, high return, low risk, low return. And in general, that correlation is to a degree true, right? When you don't have a lot of risk, you don't get much. When you take on more risk, you can get more. But what's fundamentally the idea in order to generate risk-adjusted alpha is to find out where can we materialize on opportunities without taking on too much risk. Or you can look at this the other way around. You could look at where do I currently have risk in my portfolio that doesn't get compensated for with adequate return. So on an individual altcoin level, you could look at, okay, is my current altcoin, for example, outperforming Bitcoin or Ethereum? Now, why does that matter? It matters because Bitcoin and Ethereum can be regarded as the safest cryptocurrencies. Now with Ethereum being somewhat in a limbo, with SEC not really having clear decisions made on it yet, now Bitcoin is basically the only super safe crypto. But you want to be measuring the return, or at least the expected return, of your altcoin versus Bitcoin, because any altcoin has more risk than Bitcoin. So when Bitcoin goes up 80% year to date and your altcoin goes up 60%, okay, you still made US dollar gains, but risk adjusted, you did not make gains. Even if your altcoin simply just keeps pace with Bitcoin, that's not good. Bitcoin is safer. The altcoins have less adoption, less clear regulation, potentially more token inflation, so they need more growth in order to just keep up with Bitcoin. So it's fundamental that whatever kind of risk you take is at least in line with the return. And ideally, you want to get more return even than the additional risk that you take. And measuring the risk is obviously very hard, right? Some people just measure this in terms of price volatility. That's, I think, is somewhat of a flawed concept because you can manipulate price volatility and there are risks that are not apparent in the price, right? For example, the risk of getting hacked, the risk of the entire chain. This is now what's going on with the Binance Smart Chain, right? There are risks that are not clear in the price, but you have to make a judgment call on this, similar to the expected return, right? Nobody has a clear understanding or a clear agreement of what actually the risk on something is. So does nobody have a clear understanding what the potential return on something is. But this is then in the end where there's disagreement between different market participants and where then in the end an equilibrium is found. And so the risk I am now obviously talking about with the Binance Smart Chain is all of this regulatory uncertainty. There is a 100% war on Binance now. Binance is getting sued. Who knows how this plays out? The banks are rather conservative, right? They also try to hedge themselves as much as possible. And so the compliance departments of various banks are probably saying, make sure you're not transferring money to Binance because the SEC is already putting up the lawsuit. So you'd rather be on the safe side. We don't have much to gain from allowing people to transfer to Binance. So let's stop this all together. That's probably what's going on. It's unlikely that Gary Gensler has called all the CEOs of all the banks. But the banks simply just mitigate risk. They get out when things potentially get dangerous, when their upside isn't as high as the potential downside, right? So Binance is getting attacked, and it's very hard to say, in my opinion, where this will then, in the end, lead for the centralized exchange, but also for the blockchain itself. I, for example, don't know where the nodes of the Binance Smart Chain are actually hosted. Who's the host, the cloud provider here? Is this AWS? Is this Google? Is this Microsoft? Or is this actually Alibaba or something completely independent? Somebody having physical servers in a basement somewhere? I don't know. But maybe the SEC knows. And maybe in the end, they are pushing those large tech companies, especially if the lawsuit will be in favor of the SEC, to shut down those servers. And then maybe you only have 1 or 2 servers that still keep running. And I'm not saying that all of these horror scenarios will actually play out and that the BSC will completely hold operating. But if it's, for example, very hard to withdraw or to deposit fiat into this entire system, then who doesn't say that there will be some kind of a at least partial depegging or discounting of certain assets, right? Maybe somebody prefers USDC on Polygon over USDC on Binance because they can't pull out the USDC into fiat anymore. So maybe suddenly USDC on the Binance Smart Chain depegs by 5 cents or whatever. And if that happens, what will actually happen to the DeFi apps? BUSD already can't get issued anymore, right? Paxos got a restraining order, so there's no more BUSD hitting the market. The market cap of BUSD is constantly and very steeply declining. So you've got that risk. You don't know if Tether will get sued. You also have even the risk, and that's very interesting, of potentially MetaMask getting sued, right? Because one of the potential angles of attack against Coinbase now is that Coinbase doesn't just have the tokens that are listed on the exchange, but Coinbase allows for trading of all of those thousands of tokens via the Coinbase wallet. And one of those thousands of tokens might be a security, and so Coinbase made a mistake. But yeah, MetaMask allows for trading of all of those coins as well. And MetaMask, Consensus, etc. They're all based in the US as well. So who knows who the SEC will attack next? It seems like they are not necessarily after individual coins anymore. They are now behind the central infrastructure providers, Binance and Coinbase, and maybe MetaMask being next. Now, all of this talk is simply just about mitigating risk, as in, do you actually get compensated for using the Binance Smart Chain? Are there trading opportunities that are only inherent to the Binance Smart Chain, and that's why you have to have your capital on there? If the answer to this is yes, and you have like a few alpha generating positions that can only be done on the BSC and that can't be found anywhere else, then okay, have that capital deployed there if that expected alpha or outperformance versus Bitcoin and Ethereum is higher than the potential risk that are all related to this Binance FUD. If you don't though, right, if it's simply just, say, perpetuals trading, or it's using borrowing lending platforms of relatively common tokens that are bridged all over all kinds of different chains, if there's nothing unique in your specific position that is tied to the Binance Smart Chain, then why have this additional risk to the Binance Smart Chain? It's probably the most risky of the chains right now. And I used to have pretty large exposure to it. I did very nice cake interest rate arbitrage of the Pancake Swap token. I afterwards shorted the Cake token. I can actually list the video directly after this one where I'm describing this. But yeah, there were a few opportunities on the BSC that were unique to the BSC, and so it makes sense to have that capital there. But if you can avoid this additional risk, and if you can find the same alpha somewhere else, or if the amount of alpha that you get from that BSC position isn't high enough to compensate for this now increased risk profile, then I think it's simply just a rational thing to do the same as the banks and to keep the hands off to reduce risk. So investing, if you think about this completely rationally, should not be motivated by any kind of ideology. Of course, I don't like that the SEC is suing Binance. Of course, I don't like all the trouble that it's generating. But I'm not going to just put my money into something knowing that it will potentially lose its purchasing power. I'm not going to expose my capital to a more risky position without getting the additional potential return for it. The primary target for any investor should be maximizing risk-adjusted returns. At least that's how I fundamentally see it. It should not be to do a political statement. Some people disagree, of course, and they say it's fine if I can simply just stick it to the man, then I'm okay to do losses. But I think, is this really the reason why you went into investing into the first place? Probably not. So this video is about the Binance Smart Chain, but it's also about a more fundamental concept. It does make sense to monitor what kind of risks are you actually currently taking in the portfolio. What regulatory risks, what price volatility risk, what hacking risk, bridging risk, what kind of risks do you currently have, and where can you reduce those risks and still keep potentially the same kind of outperformance? That's in the end the equation you actually want to optimize for. You want to reduce the risk as much as possible while keeping as much of the potential expected return. So simply just sitting there and saying, I don't think anything will happen to Binance, I don't think anything will happen to the Binance Smart Chain, is not necessarily a sufficient approach. I think it's better to look at this almost like an insurance and think, okay, there is the likelihood of X% that this whole thing will blow up. Let's say it's 10% in a year or two. And my alpha that I generate from this position has to be higher and has to compensate for this additional risk. If it does, then all is fine. If it doesn't, and you can find the same return somewhere else without that additional risk, and that's, I think, where the money should flow. And this is how I personally have positioned myself. Now, I want you, in case you haven't yet watched it, it's one of the most successful videos on this channel. I want you to have a look at this pancake swap interest rate arbitrage position, because there I got 40 to 50% per annum without any price risk. And then afterwards, I even shorted the pancake swap token, making an additional 30% or so. And I'm not sharing this in order to brag. I'm sharing this in order to show how to set up well-profiting positions without necessarily having to get into risks that match that high of a return profile. So even if you haven't yet watched that pancake swap video, please have a look. There's a lot of very useful alpha in it. So the video is over here. Looking forward to seeing that video, and thanks for watching this one. Bye bye.